Hi everybody, it's Dave, the Red Pill Coach, and I'm back for another week to teach you guys how to make your life better, how to make your marriage better, and how to deal with the women in your life, how to make a good marriage. That's what we're trying to do here, folks. So last week we talked about the concept of flooding, and we talked about the concept of flooding control. The notion that our sympathetic nervous system kicks into action when we're dealing with the tiger that you married. And we talked about ways to decrease that, including mindsets such as STFU and DNGAF, along with several other techniques such as meditation, awareness, mindfulness training, and a few others. You can refer back to the last video on this topic. Now, I know I explained Gottman last time, and I've got to explain him again. For those of you who are just picking this up, Gottman is and was a marriage counselor. He's a psychotherapist, and he did something completely unprecedented. He observed couples in action in his love lab, outfitted with cameras. And he was able to predict, I think I said 94% probability of divorce. It's actually only 91%, which is phenomenal and amazing. He's able to predict within a very short period of time who's going to get divorced and who's going to have a good marriage, just by the way couples interact. So he dissected those interactions, and this is what he found out. He found out, as we said, first of all, that arguments metastasize into something even worse because one or more of the partners gets flooded. Their sympathetic nervous system kicks in, they go into fight or flight, and they can no longer think clearly, and the situation escalates. Okay? Fight or flight. We can work on that and we can control that. But what about the interactions is it that causes us to go into fight or flight? Well, Gottman identified that as well. And he identified what is known in marriage counseling circles as the 4 horsemen. And that's going to be the topic of the video today. He calls them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And I call them the 4 horsemen of the divorce apocalypse, because that is what they bring. They're the harbinger of divorce. I also said we would talk about repair attempts this time, and once again, we are not ready to talk about repair attempts because first of all, we've got to lay the groundwork for what it is that we're preparing. And Gottman identified what causes marriages to go off the rails, and it is the presence of the 4 horsemen of the divorce apocalypse. These 4 horsemen are criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. I'll repeat those again and then we'll cover them one at a time. Criticism, contempt, defensiveness, and stonewalling. You could think of these as attitudes, because these are the attitudes of your partner which cause things to go off the rails, which cause people to become flooded. And I'm going to take the male perspective because my audience is mostly men. But I want to start out by saying, yes, men are like that too. Men do this as well. And as the man, as the leader of the family, it is your job to lead the example and knock it the hell off. Do not use criticism, contempt, defensiveness, or stonewalling in your marriage, unless we'll talk about a little bit later how to use stonewalling. But the other 3, you should be leading by example. You shouldn't hold your wife in contempt. You know, we always say women are children, women are little girls, and they are. But that doesn't mean you disrespect them. That doesn't mean you think any less of them. And if you are critical it is especially damaging as the man. The man is supposed to be a positive, affirming leader. Criticism is inconsistent with the role of a strong leader. However, in most cases, as Gottman acknowledges, criticism does not begin with the man. It begins with the woman. And when we talk about criticism and contempt, I think all of us immediately think of women, because women are critical. Why are they critical? Well, we'll cover that in a minute, but it's theorized that women have always been critical. It's what women do. Female energy tests and probes and seeks openings and tries to open up Pandora's box, as it were, while male energy is penetrating and thrusting. It does not attempt to envelop the opponent, but to penetrate the opponent. And by opponent I mean your wife, right? You want to penetrate your wife, while at the same time your wife has an irresistible urge to engulf you. And that would be great if I was talking about in the sexual sense, but I'm not, unfortunately. I'm talking about female energy, and this is what female energy does. So if you're engulfing something, you're going to be analyzing every piece of it, every part, and it is a natural reaction in the course of that analysis to begin to be critical, to begin to analyze and say, well, he did this and he did that, and why can't you do this better, and why don't you do it this way? All that is criticism. It is what women do. This is why I started out this series by basically talking about DNGAF and STFU. If a woman is being critical of you, the best response is to ignore. The next best response is to redirect and try to get her on a positive topic. And if that doesn't work, then you leave. And Gottman calls that the third horseman, or the fourth horseman, stonewalling. And we'll get to that in just a minute. So what I'm saying, guys, is that yes, you have to put up with some criticism from women, but don't let it affect you. Then, when it finally does begin to affect you, because she won't shut the hell up, then it's time to take that bull right by the balls and order her to stop. That's right. If a woman is being critical of you, you don't have to take it. You can simply say, calmly, methodically, sweetheart, we don't talk to each other in that tone of voice. Try again. That's all. She will either listen to you or she won't. Most likely, the first few times she'll continue complaining, well, what about this and what about that and whatever. And that's when you guys consciously bring in that fourth horseman and stonewall. Gottman treats stonewalling as every bit as bad as the other horsemen. I disagree. It's the only power men have, and we're going to use it when it's necessary. You can identify criticism by you words. You didn't do X, Y, Z. You always do this. Why do you act like this? These are words of criticism. These are words that need to be stopped. And I'm not saying stop them all at once. If you've been in a marriage where the wife is critical and where you're critical for a long time, you need to introduce this slowly. You need to introduce this inexorably, and it needs to start with you stopping the criticism. This is your wife. She deserves your respect, your affection, your love. That's what you need to give to her, and that's the model you want to present for your wife. And as I say, this horseman is released almost exclusively in marriages by women. They are critical, nagging. This is where all that nagging comes from, right? they're critical, and it's not fatal to a relationship. It depends on how the man responds. There are many, many, many long, happy marriages where the woman is hypercritical and the guy just lets it roll off him like water off a duck's back and doesn't bother him. What happens in bad marriages and in a bad marriage spiral is that the criticism turns into contempt. The second horseman is contempt. And what that means, contempt is criticism with a sneer. It is criticism with an air of authority and knowing that I'm right and you're just a stupid man. That's what contempt is. You can see it with the eye roll. You can see it with the smacking of the lip. You can see it with 100 nonverbal gestures. And it is absolutely toxic to a relationship. Now, some of you guys who are red pill-ish, or even red pillars, have identified, and you know probably where I'm going next. Because where did all this contempt come from women? Well, I would trace it back to the culture. Women didn't used to be contemptuous of men. Women used to respect men and their authority and their power, the man of the house, and so on. Well, what happened? Well, what happened, folks, was third wave feminism. Third wave feminism came in, empowered women, and took power away from men. So how does a woman react to a man who is powerless? That's right. She reacts with contempt. She reacts with impatience and anger. And I believe this is all programmed into women by our culture. You can't see a TV commercial or a sitcom on TV without the man being a clown, an incompetent boob who has to be bossed around by his kids and his wife. That's the meme. It's hilarious seeing men get kicked in the balls. Try to see if it's funny for a woman to get knocked down after getting hit in the chest. Nobody will laugh. Our culture is a culture that laughs at men. So it's not surprising that women have increased their contempt for men to really unbelievable proportions. And it's obnoxious, it's toxic to marriages, and it's probably responsible for almost all marriages. Another factor is, for example, the Where Are All the Good Men Reddit. Features a bunch of stories about basically women whining, where are all the good men? After, of course, right about the time they turned 28. And before that, they were bouncing around and hopping around and riding the cock carousel, one guy after another. But weirdly enough, none of those guys would commit to her. So she finds you. And you would commit to her. You committed to her and agreed not to have sex. You agreed not to, we wouldn't push you for this, and I'd do this, and I'd listen to whatever you say. You do that, folks, and the woman cannot respect you, and the criticism that all women throw out will inevitably, like night turns into day, will inevitably turn into contempt. Again, the solution to contempt is DNGAF and STFU. You can also throw in some shit test responses, treat her contempt as a shit test, joke your way out of it, clown your way out of it, and that may or may not work. What does work, however, is to assert authority, to be the leader, to be the man, and tell her to knock it off. Ethel Kay wrote that most drama queens are simply waiting for their prince or their king to show up and tell them to knock it off. And that's what I'm telling you guys to do. First of all, you stop it. No criticism, no contempt. Substitute positive for criticism and contempt from you. And then, when you are getting criticism and contempt from the wife, put up with it. Tolerate it until you can't tolerate it anymore. Then, very calmly, instruct her. Sweetheart, we don't talk to each other in that tone of voice. I need you to stop. If she won't stop, you leave. You can leave for up to 30 minutes or up to 24 hours, but leave. Do not sit there and be a whipping boy while a woman is being contemptuous of you. That is lower than beta. That's omega stuff, folks. Don't tolerate it. She's just a girl. Why would you tolerate bad behavior from a 9-year-old girl who's calling you, well, everything but a white man? Right? Why? The answer is you wouldn't and you shouldn't. So Gottman lays out the strategy for calling out a woman. Number 1, stop your own criticism and contempt. Set the example and be the leader. Number 2, ignore an STFU to the extent that you can. And number 3, tell her in no uncertain terms that this is not acceptable and it's going to stop. And number 4, if it doesn't, and it probably won't the first 5 or 6 times you do this, if it doesn't, you leave. You don't reinforce bad behavior. If she wants to carp and complain about you, she can carp and complain to empty air. Thank you very much. Now, it's important that if you tell her to stop and we don't talk to each other in that voice, and she does stop, it's important for you to stay around and reward that behavior. This is a time to talk to your wife. Talk about her hopes, her dreams, her feelings, her desires. That's what women want. And that's what they mean when they say, I want an emotional connection with a man. Well, what they mean is they want a man who will listen to them and acknowledge them and hear them. So do that if she's behaving appropriately. And if she won't follow your lead and she won't quit the carping and the bitching and the whining and the criticism, and most of all, the contempt, then it's time for you to leave. And I am way over time here, guys, so that's going to have to be it for now. Next week we will pick up right where we left off and talk about the other 2 horsemen of the divorce apocalypse, defensiveness and stonewalling.
I can't do this all on my own. No, I know I'm no Superman. I'm no Superman.